Scott Monroe, food safety educator with Purdue Extension, and today we want to talk a little bit about some things that produce growers might do to help manage their labor force in light of the current COVID-19 or coronavirus pandemic. There's no doubt that this current pandemic presents some challenges for produce growers. Clearly we're living in unprecedented times. This is something we've never had to face before as an industry. So now that I've used all the necessary terms and blurbs that everyone else is using on their materials, let's get down to business and talk a little bit about what we can do to manage our labor during these times. The first thing I want to make very clear is that we don't have all the answers. So what we're doing here is basically putting out some ideas. Hopefully we can generate discussion. My experience over my career of working with produce growers is that they are some of the most ingenious individuals that you'll ever meet. So in all honesty, I really feel like if we give them a few ideas or if we put a few ideas out there, folks are going to run with them and figure out how to make things work and how to get a crop produced in light of the current situation. So really when we think about this and we think about managing labor, produce growers have some big advantages in this. Probably the first big advantage is that a lot of the things that we need to do to help maintain a healthy workforce, we're already doing. Growers who have gone through third-party gap audits or are covered by the Food Safety Modernization Act Produce Safety Rule are already aware of food safety practices. For the most part, they're already encouraging frequent hand washing by their employees. They're monitoring worker health, and they're conducting worker training on health and hygiene. So this is a big advantage for produce growers in that we're already doing a lot of those things that we need to do to make sure that worker health is monitored and hopefully maintained. One thing to think about is that as we work with our labor force, we need to really start thinking in terms of treating every day as a harvest day. Thinking in terms of checking that crew, monitoring, make sure the crew is healthy before they start work. We also need to be thinking about following CDC guidelines for social distancing and for precautions. So the idea or the question is, how does that look on my farm? How do I follow CDC guidelines on my farm, knowing how my operation is put together? How does social distancing look on my farm in light of the job that has to be done to produce a crop? So one thing we think about is distancing workers. How do we keep workers 6 feet apart? Well, there's a few things you might try. One would be to stagger work schedules. One nice thing about producing produce in the summer is that the days are longer. We've got more hours to work with. So we might think in terms of having workers come in at staggered or different times during the day to do their work. We might also think about staggering workers within work areas so that there's separation. If we're working in the field, maybe putting a worker on one corner, one worker on another corner, or putting workers at two ends of the field in different rows so that we can maintain some of that distancing. Break areas, we really need to be careful with those break areas, either not using them at all and having workers just stay in an area, whether it be their own vehicle or something like that, or we really need to just keep those breaks and break times staggered to keep those workers from congregating in break areas. We also need to be cleaning those break areas very frequently, at least daily. And once they're cleaned, we need to treat surfaces with an approved sanitizer. The EPA has a list of sanitizers that are approved for use against the COVID-19 virus. So again, if you check with EPA at their website, you can see a list of approved products that you can use to sanitize surfaces or to sanitize break rooms. The key when using sanitizers is to always remember that the label is the law and that we need to read and follow label directions. Sometimes separation may not be possible. For instance, when we're doing certain tasks such as transplanting or laying plastic mulch, something like that, usually it takes more than one person. So we may not be able to get that distance. And when that happens, we need to be thinking in terms of personal protective equipment as a barrier to isolate workers. Now, we've all heard the news reports that the N95 masks are getting hard to come by, and that some of this equipment is in short supply. So I would just urge growers to look around the farm and see what you can find that could be repurposed to help serve as personal protective equipment for your workers. For instance, a lot of us have a dust mask or dust masks in our shops. Look at those. I was lucky the other day and actually found an old dust mask in my shop with the N95 rating, so that's good to use. There are instructions posted online for how to make your own mask from cotton cloth. If you check out some of those online sites, there are descriptions. In Indiana, Deaconess Hospital has put out a site with an excellent instructional video as to how we make our own mask. Gloves. Most of us have a few nitrile gloves sitting around in the chemical room, a few pair that we use for mixing pesticides or whatnot, or fertilizer solutions. These are non-porous, easily cleaned, and could be used by workers as a way of isolating or separating them from others during certain functions. Again, what we want to do is make sure that with our gloves as well as our other personal protective equipment that we're sanitizing, we're washing and sanitizing those after every use. Face mask might be something to look at. Again, if you've got a face mask in your shop that you wear when you're using the grinder, you might repurpose that as something you could use or one of your workers could use to protect them when they're working in close proximity to other workers. So again, the key here is to be flexible and just to be looking for those things that we could use on farm to repurpose as personal protective equipment for our workers. In terms of transportation, we really need to be looking at how we transport workers to and from the field. We may need to make multiple trips instead of throwing the whole crew into a bus or a gator or some other vehicle. We may need to make multiple trips. If we have larger vehicles such as buses, we may want to measure and then haul only as many as we can, staying within those 6 feet parameters for social distancing. We really would discourage, but it may become necessary, that workers use private vehicles to go to and from production areas. If that does become necessary, then we strongly recommend that you have a designated section at the edge of your production area or your field where those vehicles can be parked away from production as well. Just remember that if you are transporting workers, you need to make sure that you're cleaning and sanitizing those vehicles frequently, ideally after every use. CDC also recommends hand washing as a way to slow the spread of the COVID-19 virus. So those of us who work in produce have been encouraged for years to frequently wash hands before you start work, before you handle produce, after you use the restroom, et cetera, et cetera. So again, this is one of those places where hopefully hand washing is going to already be a part of our worker training program. And of course, we need to discourage workers from touching their eyes, their nose, their mouth. Again, something that we normally do as part of a regular good ag practices training program. Remember that when we're training workers, we really need to think in terms of training them for principles of food hygiene, food safety. They need to be able to recognize symptoms not only of foodborne illness, but also the importance of personal hygiene for themselves and anything else that's relevant to the worker's job. So for those of us who are already doing the training, it may just simply be a case of altering that training so that we also include CDC recommendations and making sure they understand how that's going to look on your farm under your specific conditions. Workers need to be monitored. Monitoring is going to be incredibly important going forward. The bottom line is that workers who appear to exhibit symptoms consistent with COVID-19 or with foodborne illness, either one should not be allowed to work and should be sent home. We've always monitored workers for signs of foodborne illness. Now we're looking for signs of COVID-19 as well, which could include fever, coughing, or anything else that may present as a respiratory illness. Again, the bottom line is these workers should not be allowed to work, and they should be sent home immediately. Either sent home or directed to an appropriate medical agency for testing and care. And again, that's going to depend on your situation. If you're using migrant labor or H-2A labor, you may find it necessary to take it upon yourself to make sure that worker gets where they need to go for appropriate medical care and testing. Workers should not return to work until test results are obtained. Those that are testing positive should be quarantined or self-quarantined until released by a medical professional. Now, on most vegetable farms, that's going to mean that worker needs to go home, stay home, self-quarantine, not come back to the farm until a medical professional tells them and you that it is okay for that worker to come back. We really recommend that daily health checks be done with all workers. And of course, documented. Why? Because if you don't document it legally, it never happened. So how does the daily health check look when we're fruit and vegetable growers and not medical professionals? A lot of that could be just as simple as asking workers before they begin work how they're feeling. Ask them if they have any signs or symptoms that would indicate respiratory illness, any fever, any fatigue, any coughing, anything else that would indicate a respiratory illness. You may even decide to take workers' temperatures before they start work to check for fever. There are several thermometers on the market that can take a temperature without actually touching the worker. So you can take that temperature without having to sanitize or wash the equipment between workers. One thing to remember, of course, is that whoever is taking that temperature is going to be in close proximity to the workers and will need to use personal protective equipment while they're doing so. So in conclusion, this is going to be a challenging year from the perspective of managing labor on our fruit and vegetable farms. We may need to access labor from places where we haven't for some time. High school students, college students that suddenly find themselves home. These are places we might need to look if we need additional labor. Remember that agriculture is considered critical infrastructure, so workers can travel back and forth with proper employment documentation. And the other thing we need to remember is that there are really no guarantees. Our goal is to make sure that we make it to harvest with a healthy labor force that can bring in the crops for us. And there really are no guarantees that this will happen. But what I can tell you is that our best bet, our best chance for having that healthy labor force to bring in the crops at harvest time is to begin at the beginning of the season and aggressively manage and monitor the health of our workers. Thank you for your attention, and remember that if you have any questions regarding workers or labor, worker management, please feel free to contact us at Purdue Extension at the contact numbers listed. I'll be happy to sit down and talk to you and kind of help you think through some of these issues. Again, I'm Scott Monroe, Purdue University Extension, and don't forget to hit that like button. Thank you.